The aging samurai wakes before dawn, his body creaking like ancient timber as he pushes himself upright. The deep silence of the house, broken only by the whisper of straw beneath his thin, sleeping mat. Outside, the world is hushed under a veil of fresh snow, the dark sky softening to a muted gray at the edges where day approaches. He does not light a lantern. The dim glow of the falling snow is enough. The air is sharp with the scent of pine smoke from distant hearths, mingling with the faint, earthy aroma of tatami, straw woven tight and clean beneath his knees as he kneels by the shoji screen. A tremor lingers in his fingers, once so steady they could split a falling leaf with his blade, as he slides the screen open, just enough to let the cold kiss his face. Snowflakes spiral down, each one a fleeting universe of crystal, vanishing the moment they touch the ground. He remembers winters when he would stand bare-chested in the dojo, his breath curling white, muscles taut as he trained until his skin burned with life. Now the cold seeps into his bones, unwelcome, a reminder. Yet there is beauty in this stillness, too. The distant toll of a temple bell rings through the frozen air, each reverberation a thread connecting him to the monks who rise even earlier, to the ancestors who once listened to the same sound centuries ago. He exhales slowly, the steam of his breath carrying with it the ghost of old battles, the weight of a name he can no longer wield as he once did. The snow muffles the world, as if the gods have laid a white cloth over Edo, granting a moment's peace before the city stirs. Inside, he moves with ritual precision, the smooth, polished wood of the tea cabinet yielding beneath his fingertips, the scent of matcha rising as he measures the powder into a chowan. The green bitterness clings to the air, familiar as an old companion. His hands shake as he pours the water just shy of boiling, but he steadies them against the bowl, the ceramic warm against his skin. Every movement is deliberate, the whisk's rhythmic strokes, the pause before the first sip, the way he cradles the cup like something sacred. Each motion is a defiance against the unraveling of time, a stitch in the fraying fabric of his discipline. The tea is sharp, cleansing, an anchor in the quiet. Outside, the snow falls thicker, blanketing the cobbled streets where merchants will soon shuffle in their geta, their footsteps a rhythmic clatter against the stones. But for now, there is only silence, and the samurai listens not with the sharpness of a warrior anticipating an ambush, but with the patience of a man who has learned the depth of listening. The katana rests on its stand, its scabbard gleaming faintly in the half-light. He does not reach for it. Instead, he closes his eyes and breathes, in and out, the way his old master taught him decades ago, when the fire of youth made meditation seem a pointless exercise. Now it is the only thing that keeps the embers of his spirit alight. The silence is not empty, it hums with the weight of all the mornings that came before, all the battles fought and the lives taken, the whispered prayers of the dead woven into the wind. When he opens his eyes again, the sky has lightened, the snow still falling. The world is unchanged, yet he is not. The trembling in his hands has stilled, if only for a moment. He watches a single flake land on the windowsill, perfect for a heartbeat before dissolving into nothingness. Perhaps this is mastery, too knowing when to let go. The day will come when his body fails him entirely, when the sword becomes too heavy, the tea too bitter, the cold too deep. But today he breathes. Today he kneels. Today the snow falls and he is here to see it. The scent of fresh tatami mats mingled with the earthy bitterness of matcha. The stillness of the dozo, punctuated only by the whisper of steam rising from the lacquered bowl. The samurai knelt, joints protesting with the familiar ache of seasons past, his calloused fingers tracing the smooth curve of the tea scoop. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through shoji screens, casting shifting patterns like the fleeting banners of forgotten battles. He closed his eyes once. He would have heard the clash of steel, the roar of men, the wet gasp of a final breath. Now, only the distant chime of a temple bell, the rustle of maple leaves against stone. His hands, once steady enough to cleave a falling petal midair, now betrayed him with the faintest tremor as he lifted the chowan. The tea's warmth seeped into his palms, a fleeting comfort. How many years since he last drew blood? The memory surfaced unbidden. The night he fought beneath a storm-lashed moon, his blade singing as it arced through the rain, the taste of iron sharp on his tongue. Back then, his body had been a weapon, honed and relentless. Now it was a vessel of quiet surrender, his strength leaching away like ink in water. Yet the way remained. He inhaled deeply, the sharp, clean scent of the dozo grounding him. The same discipline that once guided his sword now guided his breath. Each measured exhale, a release of pride. Each moment of stillness, a duel with time itself. The tea's bitterness lingered appropriate, he thought. Youth was sweet with vigor, but age offered a different mastery. The grace of restraint, the wisdom to see his reflection not in the sheen of a blade, but in the undisturbed surface of the tea. Outside, the wind stirred the cherry blossoms, their petals drifting like snow. Transient, beautiful, like the way of the warrior, like all things, his lips curved faintly. Let the young men chase glory. Here, in the silence between heartbeats, he had found something deeper. The aging samurai knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami, its clean, grassy scent mingling with the faint smoke of morning incense. The room was hushed, save for the distant cry of a hawk, a sound that once would have sent his hand flying to his katana. Now his fingers, trembling slightly with the years, traced the grain of an unworked block of white oak instead. The wood was smooth and cool against his calloused palms, a blank slate awaiting purpose. He breathed deeply, the bitter aftertaste of matcha still lingering on his tongue, and felt the old ache in his shoulders not from the weight of armor, but from time's relentless pull. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones echoed the passage of days he could no longer outrun. Once, he had moved with the deadly precision of a drawn blade, that sharp, whispering hiss of steel, the last sound his enemies heard. Now the battle was quieter. The scrape of the chisel, the patient shaping of wood, the measured cadence of his breath fighting the tremor in his wrists. Each stroke of the blade was a reckoning not with foes, but with himself. The oak resisted, then yielded, as the world had to his younger strength. He remembered the way his sword had flashed like a river's bend in sunlight, how men had spoken his name with fear. But rivers carved canyons by persistence, not force. As the bokken took form, so did his resolve. This was not surrender, but refinement. The wood, golden and unbroken, would bear no blood, only the weight of his discipline. The gods had shaped mountains with patience. He would shape this. A gust stirred the shoji screen, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. He paused, feeling the ghost of his old restlessness, the urge to stride through the world as he once had, a storm in human form. But his body betrayed him now. Even the wind seemed to push back. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, as the monks had taught him, and pressed the chisel forward. The shaving curled away like autumn leaves, like the pages of the scrolls he now studied by lamplight. The bokken's curve emerged, graceful as a branch bending under snow. And for a moment, he saw not wood, but the arc of his own life flashing and fading like the cherry blossoms outside, their petals eddying in the courtyard. When the work was done, he lifted the bokken, testing its balance. It was lighter than steel, yet it carried the weight of every dawn he had greeted with sore joints and silent resolve. The grain ran unbroken from hilt to tip, just as his spirit endured, quiet but unyielding. Beyond the dojo walls, the world rushed forward, swords giving way to guns, honor to expediency. But here, in the stillness, the old ways lived not in the clash of battle, but in the whisper of wood and the steady hands that shaped it. The samurai bowed to the empty room, as though acknowledging the ghosts of his past and the promise of his peace. The blade he had forged would never draw blood, but it would cut deeper still, into the heart of what it meant to endure. The aging samurai knelt in the dimly lit workshop, the scent of aged cedar and fresh shavings thick in the air, mingling with the faint, earthy bitterness of green tea cooling beside him. Outside, the wind whispered through the bamboo grove, a sound like the distant rustle of silk armor, a memory of battles long past. His calloused fingers, once swift and sure on the hilt of a katana, now traced the grain of each cedar plank with deliberate reverence, seeking the hidden strength beneath the smooth, sun-warmed surface. The wood bore the whispers of centuries, the slow patience of mountain growth, the sharp cry of the axe, the reverence of the craftsman's hands. He had learned, in these quiet years, that true strength lay not in the swing of the blade, but in the stillness between breaths, in the way a single grain could defy time if honored. A tremor passed through his fingertips, not from weakness, but from the weight of understanding. He exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing the ghost of his younger self, the warrior who had believed speed and steel were all. The cedar before him held no illusions. It would not bend to force, only to wisdom. His nail caught on a knot, and he paused, feeling the resistance. Once, he might have cleaved through such imperfection. Now, he turned the wood toward the pale morning light streaming through the shoji screen, studying the intricate paths of the grain as though they were the lines of an ancient map. Each piece he chose was a silent prayer to the tree that had grown tall under the gaze of the gods, to the artisans who had shaped it, to the unbroken lineage of discipline that had carried him here. Far from the clamor of the battlefield, the rhythmic scrape of his plane across the wood filled the room, steady as a heartbeat, each stroke a meditation. He imagined the cedar sighing as its true form emerged, just as he, too, had been stripped of pride, of violence, of everything but the essence of duty. The clatter of a neighbor's guitar on the cobbled street outside broke the stillness, but he did not rush. In the curl of shavings at his feet, in the sweat beading at his temple, in the quiet ache of his knees against the tatami, he found something deeper than victory, the slow, sacred mastery of surrender. The tea had gone cold. He drank it anyway, the bitterness a reminder. The blade, though sheathed, was still sharp. The cedar, though silent, was still strong. And he, though weathered, was still a servant of the way. The scent of freshly woven tatami mats mingled with the delicate bitterness of matcha, steam curling like morning, mist over the low table where the samurai knelt. His hands, broad and veined with the passage of countless battles, rested upon the unfinished bokken, a length of oak, pale as winter moonlight, waiting to be shaped into something worthy of its purpose. The faintest tremor flickered in his fingers, not from uncertainty, but from the memory of 10,000 strikes, 10,000 parries, the ghost of his younger self still alive in the sinew and bone. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of the distant temple bell tolling through the twilight, its voice steady as the turning of the seasons. The blade of his chisel caught the fading light, a fleeting gleam like the edge of his katana once had in the dawn before battle. Each stroke of the tool was measured, the whisper of wood yielding beneath his touch as familiar as the rasp of silk against armor. He could still hear the clamor of swords clashing, the cries of men who had fallen to his blade honorable deaths, all of them, yet the silence here was louder, thick with the weight of reflection. The grain of the oak spiraled like the currents of a river, and as he smoothed the curve of the bokken's grip, he thought of the cherry blossoms shed each spring, their petals falling without regret. This was not surrender, but evolution. The warrior's path did not end with the weakening of the body, but deepened with the stillness of the mind. The blade he carved would never taste blood, yet in its balance, its purity of form, It would carry the essence of Bushido, the unbroken line between the man he had been and the sage he sought to become. Outside, the wind stirred the Chinese letter, its murmur a secret shared with the ancients. His hands did not waver. The scent of fresh tatami and steamed green tea curled through the quiet dojo as the old samurai knelt. The polished wood smooth and cool beneath his calloused palms. Outside, the last cicadas of summer hummed their farewells, their song mingling with the distant clatter of geta on cobblestones, a world moving on while he remained, suspended between memory and stillness. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the teacup, the bitter aroma sharpening his senses. And for a heartbeat, he was no longer an aging warrior, but a young man standing in the rain-soaked aftermath of battle. The air had reeked of iron and damp earth that day, his sword gleaming crimson as he wiped it clean, his lord's gratitude a weight heavier than the dead at his feet. His body had been a weapon then, swift and sure. But the wound he took defending his lord's flank had never truly healed a ragged scar across his ribs, a reminder of the price of loyalty. Now his breath hitched as he stretched his aching side, the pain a whisper of that old violence. But he exhaled slowly, willing the tension to dissolve like mist over still water. The katana laid before him caught the pale morning light, its edge so sharp it seemed to hum with a sound only he could hear, the same quiet song it had sung decades ago, when steel decided fates. His hands, once steady as mountain stone, now hesitated before touching the hilt, the leather wrap frayed from years of grip. Was it the sword that had grown heavier, or his soul? The question coiled in his chest, unresolved. Yet as he closed his eyes and inhaled the clean, woody scent of the dojo, the chaos of memory yielded to the discipline of ritual. The precise angle of his knees on the floor, the way the silk of his hakama whispered against tatami, the measured pour of tea into a bowl worn smooth by generations. Here, in the silent dialogue between breath and blade, between the scar and the man who bore it, he sought not the fury of the storm, but the stillness at its center. The past was a ghost, but the present the weight of the cup, the slant of sunlight through paper screens, the distant cry of a crane over the river was a prayer. And so he bowed, not to the man he had been, but to the peace he might yet become. The air in the small, dimly lit chamber was thick with the clean, grassy scent of tatami, woven tight by hands that had known generations of labor, and the faint, earthy bitterness of freshly whisked matcha, its steam curling like the ghost of a forgotten sigh. The samurai knelt before the half-carved wooden statue of Jizo, his chisel poised, his fingers once so sure, so deadly now betraying the slightest tremor as they danced along the grain. Outside, the first heavy drops of rain began to patter against the shoji screens, a murmuring prelude to the storm. The scent of wet stone and damp pine seeped through the cracks, mingling with the incense burning low on the altar, its smoke a fragile ribbon rising toward the ceiling. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, as he had done 1,000 times before standing on battlefields, when the air had tasted of iron and sweat and the cries of men. Now, there was only the quiet. The storm grew louder, the wind rattling the screens like an impatient spirit, but his hand did not falter. Each stroke of the chisel was deliberate, a whispered conversation with the wood, as if the grain itself held the secrets of Bushido patience, precision, the silent dignity of mastery. Memories flickered at the edges of his focus. The razor-sharp hiss of his katana leaving its saya, the way the morning mist had clung to his armor like a second skin, the weight of 1,000 stares upon him as he moved through the streets, a figure of awe and fear. Now the townsfolk barely glanced at the old man in plain robes, his sword hanging unused at his side. The thought might have soured his spirit once, but here, in this fragile peace, he found a different kind of strength. Rain lashed the roof now, a relentless drumming that blurred the boundary between earth and sky. Yet his breathing remained steady, his movements unhurried. The wood beneath his hands was cool, smooth save for the ridges of his own making, each groove a testament to the hours spent in silent communion with the blade, the brush, the chisel. A sudden gust extinguished the candle beside him, plunging the room into shadow, but he did not curse or startle. Darkness, too, was an old companion. He set down the chisel, wincing at the ache in his joints, and reached for the teapot, pouring with ritual care. The tea was bitter on his tongue, a reminder of life's unyielding truths, yet its warmth spread through him like the first light of dawn. Outside, the storm raged, but within, there was only the rhythm of his breath, the slow unfolding of craft, and the quiet certainty that even as the body faded, the spirit honed by discipline, tempered by time, would endure. The statue's face was still rough, incomplete, much like the path before him. But in the space between thunderclaps, in the stillness of his own unwavering focus, he found not an end, but a beginning. The polished bokken rested across his knees, its smooth, oiled surface catching the dim light of the dawn filtering through the shoji screens. The air was crisp, carrying the clean scent of fresh tatami, and the faint, earthy tang of green tea steaming beside him, his lone indulgence in these quiet hours. His calloused fingers, once swift, unerring in their grip, traced the curve of the wooden sword, lingering where the grain twisted in an unexpected knot. A flaw hidden beneath layers of lacquer, a tightness coiled in his chest, familiar as the ache in his joints after a long night's vigil. Was this how the gods mocked him? Years of discipline, of perfecting form, only for his hands to betray him. Now a tremor here, a delayed strike there, while even the wood, shaped by masters, bore imperfections no craftsman could erase. The knot resisted his thumb, an unyielding blemish, and his breath stalled for the barest moment, as it had decades ago on the battlefield, when he first saw his own mortality reflected in an opponent's blade. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones echoed youthful steps, swift and sure, while the wind stirred the cherry blossoms against the eaves, their petals falling like the fading echoes of his past victories. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, and the bitterness of the tea on his tongue mingled with the memory of iron and sweat. The bokken was flawed, yes, but so was the hand that held it, and so was the world, the old order crumbling, his body yielding to time, the code of Bushido now a whisper where it had once been a roar. Yet in this stillness, in the deliberate caress of worn wood, in the measured breath that followed the weight of recognition, there was something deeper than perfection. The knot would remain. His grip adjusted, not to conquer it, but to understand it as he had learned to understand the silence between heartbeats, the way the moon's reflection wavered, but never broke upon the water. The tea cooled, the light shifted, and the samurai, his brow unknitting, began anew. The old samurai knelt in the dim light of the dojo, the scent of fresh tatami mats and the earthy bitterness of green tea lingering in the air. Outside, the first light of dawn brushed the shoji screens, casting delicate shadows that shifted like restless spirits. His hands, once steady as stone, trembled slightly as he reached for the katana resting before him, its saya smooth and cool against his weathered fingers. The blade whispered free with a sound so sharp, it seemed to carve the silence itself. For decades, this had been his ritual. The weight of steel in his palm, the precision of a strike, the certainty of purpose. But now, his breath hitched just slightly as he exhaled, the ghost of his younger self mocking the tremor in his wrists. The world had changed. Wars were fought with guns now, not honor. The gods of battle had turned their faces away. His body, though still disciplined, was no longer the unstoppable force it had once been. The thought coiled in his chest like smoke. Had his devotion to Bushido become obsolete? Or was there another path to mastery? He closed his eyes, letting the stillness settle around him. The distant clatter of geta on cobbled streets filtered through the walls, a rhythm fleeting as the seasons. Memories flashed behind his eyelids. The heat of summer battles, the cold grip of winter marches, the way his blade had once moved like an extension of his soul. But now, even the act of sitting in seiza sent dull aches through his knees each twinge, a reminder of time's indifferent march. His fingers tightened around the hilt, knuckles whitening. Was this to be his end, a relic grasping at the fraying threads of a forgotten code? The bitterness of the tea still clung to his tongue, a taste not unlike regret. Then a breath, deep, slow, measured. The air in the dojo shifted, carrying the faintest hint of incense from the family altar. His shoulders eased. The katana before him caught the creeping light, its edge gleaming like a promise. Was strength only in the sword? Was mastery only in the cut? The answer hovered just beyond reach, weightless as morning mist. His mind turned to the monks of Aiheiji, their faces serene as they moved through rituals older than the samurai caste itself. They wielded no blades, yet their discipline was unshakable. Perhaps the true test of Bushido was not in defiance of age, but in adaptation, the wisdom to bend without breaking, like bamboo in the wind. With deliberate care, he sheathed the katana, the click of the lock a quiet resolution. The polished wood of the saya met his palm once more, no longer a weapon, but an offering not to war, but to stillness. The project, this relentless pursuit of fading glory, could be reshaped. Mastery was not surrender. It was the patience to kneel until the world settled around him, until his breath matched the rhythm of the earth, until the divine could be found not in blood, but in silence. Outside, the wind stirred the cherry blossoms. Petals clung to the cobbles, brief and beautiful. The old samurai bowed his head and knew. The path forward was not abandonment, but transformation. The aging samurai knelt upon the tatami, the crisp, sun-warmed scent of woven straw mingling with the faint bitterness of freshly powdered matcha. His fingers, once swift and unerring as a falcon's strike, now betrayed him a tremor, slight but undeniable, as they hovered above the lacquered tray. The sword lay before him, its scabbard a midnight curve against the pale mats. He inhaled, slow as the tide pulling from the shore, and closed his eyes. The room held its breath with him, the whisper of wind through cedar beams, the distant hum of a bee against the shoji screen, the taut silence between heartbeats where the gods were said to listen. When he drew the blade, the sound was a single note of winter shink, a whisper so sharp it could have parted the damp morning air. But the edge wavered in his grip, a hair's breadth off true. A younger man might have cursed, a lesser one might have hidden the flaw. Instead, he exhaled, long and deliberate, and let the truth settle into his bones like ink sinking into parchment. His body was no longer the unstoppable force that had once carved lightning through battlefields. Yet Bushido was not merely the art of the sword, but the art of the soul-shaping circumstance. The tremor, then, would become part of the cut, turning the blade in the thin light. He studied the way the steel caught the dawn, a ripple like disturbed water, imperfect, alive. He remembered his master's words beneath the cherry blossoms decades past. A river does not resent the stone that bends its path. It sings against it. His thumb brushed the wrapping of the hilt, frayed silk smooth, as a heron's feather under calloused skin. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones pulsed like a distant drumbeat, laborers and merchants moving through a world that had little need for old warriors. For a moment, the weight of it pressed against his ribs, the fear that his honor might fray with his body, that the code he'd sworn to might one day slip through his failing fingers like sand. But then the scent of green tea rose from the cup beside him, earthy and bright, and his shoulders eased. The ritual remained. The discipline remained. With meticulous care, he adjusted his grip, rolling his wrist infinitesimally inward to accommodate the shake. The next draw was slower, a meditation in motion kinhin with a blade. The tremor traced its own path now, a dry branch cracking in winter rather than the snap of a taut bowstring. But the cut still found its mark. The imperfections of age, he realized, were not a broken gate, but a bridge. They forced him to walk the sword's edge with reverence instead of arrogance, to listen as keenly as he struck. The tea cooled beside him, its steam thinning into the damp air, as he sheathed the blade carved anew by stillness. The cicadas began their afternoon chorus beyond the garden, 1,000 voices rising and falling like the breath of the land itself. He smiled faintly. Let the young men have their untested steel. His sword would sing with the wisdom of the wind through old pines, and his cuts would carry the weight of every stone the river had ever polished smooth. The samurai knelt upon the tatami, the scent of fresh straw mingling with the faint, earthy bitterness of steamed green tea beside him. His calloused hands settled on his thighs, fingers tensing once almost imperceptibly before relaxing, betraying the tremor that had begun to creep into his grip with the passing years. The morning air carried the damp chill of early autumn. The sliding shoji doors left slightly ajar, so the rustle of maple leaves against the veranda could accompany his meditation. He closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose, the sound joining the distant clatter of wooden geta on cobblestones as the world outside woke without him. The katana rested across his knees, its scabbard black as a moonless night, so finely polished he could see the ghost of his own face in the lacquer lined now. The sharpness of his youth softened like a blade worn by time and honorable use. The sword's presence was a weight both comforting and haunting, a reminder of the hands that had once wielded it without hesitation, the bodies it had cut down like winter wheat before the harvest. Now, when he drew it, the whisper of steel against Seiya was still flawless, but his own breathing hitched for half a heartbeat, his joints protesting like unoiled hinges. The teacup, smooth and cool beneath his fingers, bore a hairline crack along its rim, an imperfection the potter had embraced, filling the flaw with gold so that it shimmered like a scar. He studied it, tracing the delicate vein with his thumb, and found himself smiling faintly. How like his own life, the battles that had left their marks upon his body and soul, the failures woven into his victories, all of them part of the whole. He sipped the tea, the bitterness pooling on his tongue, and remembered the first time he had tasted it as a boy, grimacing while his master laughed and said, "Ah, but the bitterness is the point. It teaches you to savor what comes after." What came after now was the quiet, the slow mastery of stillness. No longer the frenetic dance of combat, but the deliberate, measured breath that settled his spirit like dust in undisturbed water. Outside, a sparrow alighted on the moss-crusted lantern in the garden, its song piercing the stillness. His gaze lingered on the way its tiny chest swelled with life, the unthinking perfection of its existence, no need for codes or honor, only the certainty of flight and hunger and dawn. Was this not also a kind of Bushido? To move through the world with such unburdened grace? He straightened his spine, feeling the old wound in his side pull taut, a stubborn companion. The gods, he knew, were neither cruel nor kind. They simply were, as the seasons turned, as the cherry blossoms fell. His body might betray him, but his mind, his mind could still sharpen like the edge of his blade, honed by the whetstone of discipline, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath him, the brush of silk against his knees, even the distant murmur of the river beyond the walls, all of it wove into his awareness. A tapestry of sensation. He inhaled again, deeper this time, and imagined his breath as the wind that had once carried the war banners of his ancestors. The same wind that now stirred the dying embers of his hearth. There was peace in this surrender, in the acceptance that the man who had once cleaved through armies could now find triumph in the stillness of a single, unshaken moment. The crack in the cup still held the tea, the scar in his side still carried his history. And the sword, always the sword, remained, not as a tool for killing, but as a bridge between who he had been and who he had become. A warrior learning, at last, how to live. The clean, grassy scent of fresh tatami mats mingled with the earthy bitterness of matcha, steaming in a chipped ceramic cup beside him. The samurai knelt in seiza, his calloused fingers pausing over the unfinished bokken in his lap. The smooth, pale would cool against his skin. Outside, the whisper of bamboo leaves brushing against the shoji screen marked time like a silent metronome. His breath, slow and deliberate, deepened as the amber light of dusk spilled through the paper panels, casting long shadows that stretched like old regrets. The blade of his mind, once honed to a razor's edge in battle, now sought its sharpness in stillness, yet his hands, gnarled and scarred, trembled faintly. A memory surfaced, the weightlessness of his katana as it left its seiya years ago, the sharp, clear shink of steel singing past his ear, its arc a silver flash in the morning sun. Now, the minutest movements adjusting his grip on the chisel, the press of thumb against grain demanded focus. His pulse, once quickened by the roar of war drums, now synced with the rhythmic tock-tock of wood yielding to steel, each strike a meditation. The bokken's curve mirrored the path of cherry blossoms drifting to the moss below, impermanent, yet perfect in their descent. He exhaled, releasing the tension in his shoulders as the blade of his tool bit deeper, guided by decades of instinct. The shavings curled like fallen petals, their edges catching the light like the armor of long-dead comrades. His teacher's voice echoed through the years. The sword is a tool for polishing the soul. But what of a soul already wetted by 100 battles, its nicks and notches hidden beneath ceremony? The chisel faltered. A bead of sweat traced his temple. The past was a storm he could no longer outrun, only let pass through him, like wind through a hollow reed. Outside, the temple bell tolled, its resonance humming in his ribs, a reminder of the monks who had knelt here before him, wearing grooves into the floorboards with their devotion. He took another sip of tea, the bitterness grounding him. The bokken, still rough in places, was no longer just a training tool, it was the weight of discipline, the balance between his fading body and his unbending spirit. With renewed clarity, he resumed his work, the chisel's edge whispering along the grain, following an invisible line inscribed by the gods themselves. Each stroke was a sutra, each shaving a page torn from the book of his pride. The wood, like his resolve, was unyielding, but in surrender to the craft, he found the peace he sought, not in the clash of steel, but in the quiet mastery of creating something that would outlast him. The lanterns flickered as night deepened, their light pooling around him like an invisible armor. Tomorrow, the cicadas would sing, the market's clamor would rise, and the world would turn without noticing his quiet rebellion against time. But here, in this moment, the bokken in his hands was enough. As the last amber streaks of sunset faded beyond the shoji screens, the samurai knelt in the hushed stillness of his chamber, the scent of freshly woven tatami mingling with the faint, earthy bitterness of green tea cooling beside him. His calloused fingers traced the smooth, oiled wood of the bokken, the practice blade's pale grain glowing like moonlit ivory under the lantern's flicker. Each deliberate stroke of the cloth echoed the rhythm of his breath, slow, measured, yet beneath the surface. A tremor lingered in his hands, a betraying whisper of the years that had dulled the lightning precision of his youth. The quiet shick of fabric against wood was the only sound, though in his mind he heard the ghost of his katana hissing from its scabbard, the way it had once sung through the air like a cleaving wind. Outside, the distant clatter of geta on cobblestones, merchants returning home, young warriors laughing, only deepened his solitude. He paused, inhaling the damp night air, heavy with the perfume of late blooming chrysanthemums, and closed his eyes. The weight of memory pressed upon him. The way his limbs had once moved without thought, his body an extension of the blade, alive with the certainty of Bushido. Now, even this simple act of polishing felt like a prayer, a plea to the gods of war and time to let him find grace in stillness. The lantern's light wavered, casting restless shadows that danced like battling spirits, and for a breath, he imagined his ancestors watching, their judgment as unyielding as the steel they once wielded. His thumb brushed a faint nick in the bokken's surface, a flaw unnoticed by any but him, a scar left by a student's misplaced strike. It comforted him, this imperfection. It spoke of use, of purpose beyond perfection. The tea had gone cold, its bitterness sharp on his tongue as he sipped, a reminder that mastery, too, could be found in surrender. The moon rose, silvering the wooden floor, and he straightened his spine, feeling the ache in his knees, the protest of old wounds. Yet in that discomfort, there was a strange peace. The bokken, now gleaming like still water, mirrored his resolve to hone not just the blade, but the spirit to let the fire of his youth settle into the enduring radiance of disciplined calm. The night deepened, the sounds of the world softening into a lullaby of crickets and rustling leaves. And as he set the bokken aside, he knew the battle was not against time, but within it. The aged samurai knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami, the sharp, grassy scent of fresh matcha curling upward from the chowin cradled in his weathered hands. The katana before him lay unsheathed, its blade catching the pale morning light in a single, unbroken line like the path of a heron across still water. His fingers, once swift enough to split a falling leaf midair, now trembled slightly as they traced the groove of the the sword's blood channel, worn smooth by decades of oil and devotion. The balance was perfect, as ever. The steel remembered what his body threatened to forget. A whisper of wind through the shoji carried the distant clatter of geta on cobblestone's youths, rushing toward a world that had no use for the measured rhythms of Bushido. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, the bitterness of the tea lingering on his tongue like the aftertaste of battles long past. The sword's tsuka, wrapped in silk worn soft by generations of grips, yielded to his touch, cool as river stones. Memories pressed in, the shink of a blade drawn at dawn, the copper tang of blood on snow, the way his younger self had reveled in the certainty of steel. Now, the certainty was different. The gods had not forsaken him, but time was a subtler foe than any he'd faced in the duel-strewn streets of his prime. His knees ached from the seiza posture, yet he held firm. Discipline was not the absence of discomfort, but the mastery of it. The incense smoke curled like a phantom around the Kamidana altar, carrying his silent prayers upward not for strength, but for grace. Outside, a maple leaf brushed the eaves, its edges just beginning to crimson. Autumn, too, knew the dignity of surrender. He lifted the katana midway, pausing as the light spilled down its length. The pause stretched a breath, a lifetime. Here, in the stillness between movement and intention, was the lesson the sword still taught him. Mastery was not in the strike, but in the poised tension before it. His pulse, steady as a temple bell's decay, thrummed against the blade's mune. Once he'd believed honor lived in the perfection of form. Now, he felt it in the imperfection of his resolve, the way his breath hitched as he acknowledged the fear beneath his pride. The tea's warmth had faded. The scent of polished hinoki wood and aged paper blended with the damp earth murmur of approaching rain. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a shopkeeper laughed, heedless of the old man communing with ghosts in the shadows. The sword lowered, not with the flourish of his youth, but with the reverence of a monk laying down sutras. His calloused thumb brushed the kisaki, the point where the blade became dimensionless, sharp enough to divide spirit from flesh. It had cut down men, yes, but also his own arrogance, his clinging to a world that mistook stillness for weakness. The rain began in earnest now, pattering against the wooden engawa like fingertips drumming a battle rhythm. He smiled, Let the young men chase glory. Let the streets forget his name. The sword's balance was perfect, and so was this moment. The weight of years, the whisper of steel, the bitter tea, the gathering storm. Honor was not preserved, it was practiced here, in the quiet alchemy of discipline and decay. The katana's edge gleamed, indifferent to time. And for now, so did he. The aging samurai knelt upon the tatami mat. Its crisp, sun-dried scent mingling with the faint earthiness of freshly whisked matcha, simple, clean aromas that grounded him. The bokken, polished smooth by decades of use, lay before him, its wood grain catching the pale morning light like the veins of a maple leaf in autumn. He exhaled, long and slow, feeling the tremor in his fingers once steady as stone, now betraying time's passage before closing them around the hilt. The rhythm of his pulse, once thunderous before battle, now whispered under his skin, a quiet drum marking the cadence of his fading years. Drawing the bokken upward, the blade whispered too, a hushed sweep through the air, softer than the rustle of silk against his hakama. His body remembered the kata even as his bones protested. Each movement extension, pause, turn flowed like water over river stones, deliberate and inevitable. The courtyard around him was still, but for the occasional scatter of cherry blossom petals, their pink edges curling like burnt paper, and the distant clatter of geta on cobblestones, a reminder of the world moving beyond these walls. His mind wandered, despite his discipline. He recalled sparring bouts in his youth, the cries of opponents, the slick grip of sweat on his katana's tsuka, the way his muscles burned with fury and pride. Now the fire was banked to embers, but the Bushido that forged him remained, unyielding as tempered steel. Was this enough, this solitary dance with a wooden sword, this silent communion with emptiness? The question lingered like the bitterness of the tea on his tongue. Yet as he flowed into the final stance, bokken poised as if to cleave the dawn itself, he felt it. The thin, luminous thread between motion and stillness, between the man he had been and the one he was becoming. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of damp moss and distant rain. And for a breath, he was neither old nor young, merely part of the wind's path, the earth's turn, the unbroken line of those who had walked this way before him, warriors, monks, poets, all seeking the same unnameable peace. His blade lowered. The weight of the bokken in his hands was no longer a burden but an anchor, its smooth wood as familiar as his own skin. The tremor was gone. For now, that was enough. The scent of fresh tatami mingled with the earthy bitterness of matcha, its steam curling in the thin morning light that seeped through the shoji screens. The samurai knelt in perfect stillness, his spine straight as a blade, the folds of his indigo kimono pooling around him like still water. His hands, once capable of splitting a falling leaf midair, now trembled slightly. As he lifted the chowan, the tremor so faint only he noticed it. A whisper of time's cruelty. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of wooden geta echoed on the cobbled streets, the sound sharp against the hush of the dawn, a reminder of the world moving on without him. Inside, the silence was heavier, broken only by the soft rustle of silk as he adjusted his posture, the faint creak of aged joints protesting the motion. His breath deepened, deliberate, as if he could inhale the tranquility of the room itself, the smooth, cool touch of the polished wooden floor beneath him, the faint aroma of pine, resin from the beams overhead, the way the light shifted like the slow turn of autumn into winter. It was in these quiet moments that the past pressed closest. The thunder of hooves on bloodied earth, the screams of battle, the weight of a katana drawn with lethal precision, its shink once as familiar as his own heartbeat. Now the blade rested in its saya, its edge untested for years, yet its presence was a comfort, a tether to the man he had been. Then, the scrape of the garden gate, the hesitant crunch of gravel underfoot. The young apprentice stood at the threshold, his new straw zari dusty from the road, his eyes wide with the awe of one confronting a legend. The samurai did not turn, but he felt the boy's gaze like a physical weight youth measuring decay, vigor assessing frailty. A fleeting ache curled in his chest, not for the boy's admiration, but for the unspoken question in his silence. Is this all that remains of the storm that once shook the mountains? The samurai exhaled, long and slow, letting the doubt dissolve like ash in water. With ceremony unchanged for centuries, he poured tea for the boy, the liquid dark as polished obsidian, its surface catching the light like the moon on a still lake. The apprentice knelt, his movements awkward with reverence, his fingers brushing the chowan as if it might vanish. The samurai watched him, the way his breath hitched, the way his throat worked as he struggled to find words fit for a man who had once walked with gods and demons alike. There was no need for speech. The lesson was in the stillness, the way the steam rose in unbroken ribbons, the way the mat breathed beneath them, the way the old warrior's hands, though marked by time, never faltered in their purpose. Here, in the quiet heart of the dojo, the fraying edges of his strength were not a defeat, but a transmutation, the fire of battle banked into the ember of discipline, the sword arm steadied by the weight of wisdom. The boy's eyes dropped to the katana at the samurai's side, its tsuba gleaming dully in the diffused light. And for a moment, the old warrior wondered if he saw the ghosts lingering in the steel, the countless lives taken, the oaths sworn, the unbroken line of Bushido stretching back to the age of crumbling scrolls and whispered kami. Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves, their edges tinged with the first blush of red. The samurai smiled. Autumn, too, was a kind of mastery. The aging samurai knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami, the clean scent of woven straw mingling with the sharp, earthy aroma of freshly whisked matcha. His hands, once swift enough to draw his katana in the space between a falcon's cry and its echo, now trembled slightly as he lifted the worn bokken from its silk wrapping. The wood, polished smooth by decades of practice, carried the weight of memory, each scratch a battle avoided, each grain a lesson learned. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones whispered of a world moving on. But here, in the quiet of the dojo, time slowed to the pace of breath. The apprentice knelt across from him, eyes wide with the hunger of youth, unaware yet of how the soul could ache beneath unbroken posture. "This," the samurai murmured, tracing a finger along the bokken's curve, "is not merely wood. It is the shadow of the sword, and the shadow endures when the blade rusts." The silence deepened, broken only by the distant call of a temple bell, its resonance lingering like the ghost of a fallen comrade. He remembered his sensei's voice steel may bend, but the spirit must not. And the way the autumn wind had carried cherry blossoms to the training yard the day he first held a real katana, now his joints protested like old hinges, yet his breath remained steady as he demonstrated the falcon's strike. The movement pared down to its essence, slower now, but purer. "Craftsmanship," he continued, watching the late afternoon light stripe the floor like golden arrows, "is the act of carving away the unnecessary until only truth remains." The apprentice's brow furrowed, and the samurai smiled faintly. Understanding would come like dawn, inevitable but never rushed. He inhaled, catching the faintest tang of pine from the garden, and let the weight of the bokken anchor him. Here, in the stillness between motions, was the heart of Bushido, not in the fury of battle, but in the patience of the artisan who shapes the hilt to fit the hand, the soldier who polishes his armor though war may never come. The shadows lengthened, and as the first fireflies blinked beyond the shoji, he saw his reflection in the apprentice's gaze. Not a legend, but a man. A man who had learned that mastery was not a peak to conquer, but a path to walk with reverence, each step a whisper to the gods of discipline, each breath a bridge between the sword arm's decline and the soul's ascent. The aging samurai knelt upon the tatami, the clean scent of woven straw mingling with the faint, grassy bitterness of freshly whisked matcha beside him. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the shoji screens in pale gold, and the distant cry of a lone crow echoed through the mist-laden streets, a sound as sharp as memory. His hands, once swift and sure as a falcon's strike, now trembled slightly as he lifted the bokken from its silk wrapper, sun-bleached oak, polished smooth by decades of practice, its grain whispering of forests older than the emperors who had ruled them. The weight was familiar, yet different. No longer the extension of his might, but something quieter, deeper. He exhaled, long and slow, the rhythm mirroring the distant toll of a temple bell, and for a moment he was young again, the ache in his knees forgotten, the smell of blood and iron in his nose, the deafening silence before battle. But the memory flickered like candlelight, and the present returned the cool touch of morning air on his skin, the apprentice's uneven breath beside him, the way the light caught the faintest trace of silver in the boy's ink-black hair. The samurai turned the bokken in his palms, fingertips tracing the subtle dents each a story. Here, where the grain dipped, a duel beneath autumn maples, scarlet leaves swirling like embers. There, the faintest crack, the night he had stood guard in the snow, blade unsheathed until dawn, his lord's life balanced on the edge of his vigilance. His fingers paused. How many times had he lifted this wood, this proxy for steel, seeking perfection in the arc of a cut? Yet now the lesson was not in striking, but in releasing. He inhaled, the scent of tea and cedar filling his lungs, and offered the bokken to the boy, hands open, palms upturned, like a priest presenting an offering to the gods. The apprentice hesitated, eyes wide with the gravity of the moment. The samurai watched sunlight catch the boy's unsure fingers still soft, unmarked by calluses or the scars of failure, and felt the ghost of his own youth stir. Will he understand? Not just the footwork, the angles, but the stillness beneath motion, the way breath could steady a wavering spirit. The way honor was not in the strength of the arm, but in the patience of the heart. Outside, a breeze rustled the bamboo grove, its hollow clatter like the footsteps of ancestors. The boy reached out, and as their hands brushed old skin meeting new, the samurai smiled. The bokken passed between them, lighter now, as if the weight of its history had been shared. In the silence that followed, the samurai closed his eyes. The distant murmur of the waking city filtered through the walls, the clatter of geta on stone, a merchant's laugh, the rhythmic scrape of a broom sweeping away yesterday's dust. Life relentless as the turning seasons. His body might fade, his reflexes dull, but this moment, this passing of flame to kindling, was a kind of mastery too. The bitter tea cooled on his tongue, the taste lingering like a final lesson. Here, he thought, is where the true sword is forged, not in the hand, but in the space between one breath and the next. The boy knelt straighter, gripping the bokken with reverence, and the samurai bowed low, forehead touching the mats. The cycle turned, the sun rose, and in the quiet the old warrior found his peace. The chamber was hushed, save for the faint creak of aged wood and the whisper of snowflakes drifting against the shoji screens, their delicate touch vanishing like fleeting thoughts. The samurai knelt on the tatami, its straw scent mingling with the faint, earthy bitterness of freshly whisked matcha steam curling, like a spirit from the chowin cradled in his hands. His palms, once calloused from a lifetime of gripping the tsuka of his katana, now trembled slightly with the weight of years. The tremor so slight it might have been the shiver of a branch beneath snow. Outside, the world was softening. The courtyard's jagged stones and gnarled pines blurred beneath a silent cascade, each flake a fleeting masterwork of impermanence. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, feeling the ache in his knees, not the pain of battle wounds, though they still sang to him on damp evenings, but the quiet protest of time, the unrelenting tide that had dulled the edge of his one sun-yielding body. Yet his breath, when he drew it in again, was steady, measured as controlled as the moment before an eye-jutsu strike, when the sword's whisper was sharper than its cut. The memory rose unbidden, the taut silence before battle, the way his heart had thundered then, a drum of purpose. Now, the stillness was different, deeper. The drumbeat slowed to the rhythm of falling snow. He lifted the chowan, the ceramic warm against his skin, and sipped, the tea's bitterness a sacrament, a reminder that mastery was not in dominance, but in surrender to the moment, to the body's limits, to the quiet unraveling of self like the steam dissolving into air. The katana lay sheathed beside him, its tsuba dulled with age but the blade within still keen, a paradox that mirrored his own soul. The warrior's fire banked but not extinguished, banked, transmuted. A gust brushed the screens, and for a heartbeat, the room trembled with the cold, the flicker of the Andon lamp casting swaying shadows like restless ghosts of his past battles. He did not stir. The snow outside fell thicker now, muffling the distant clatter of geta on cobbles, the world beyond the walls receding as if the storm were drawing a white curtain over the clamor of a changing era. Here, in this fragile peace, he was neither relic nor rebel, but a man aligned with the ancient pulse of Bushido, not in spite of his fading strength, but because of it. The path of the sword had led him here, to this stillness, where honor was not won with blade strokes, but with the unshakable resolve to meet each moment, each breath, with the same unwavering presence as the first light of dawn touching the snow. And so he sat, the cold air sharp in his lungs, the warmth of the tea fading on his tongue, the silence within and without merging like the footsteps of 1,000 ancestors, each print filled with snow, each one perfect, and then gone. The aging samurai knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami, the crisp, woody scent of fresh straw mingling with the faint, ceremonial bitterness of matcha lingering on his tongue. His fingers, once quick as a drawn blade, now trembled slightly as he lifted the chowan, the polished clay smooth against his calloused skin. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones echoed youthful footsteps, swift and careless, a world rushing toward a future he no longer recognized. The breeze carried the faintest tang of cherry blossoms past their prime, their petals drifting like fleeting prayers to the kami of time. Inside the dimly lit dojo, dust motes danced in a slant of afternoon light, catching on the edge of his sheathed katana its whisper soft sigh as it left the saya, a sound he could still hear in his bones, though his own draws had grown slower, each movement weighed by the ghosts of old battles. He exhaled, long and deliberate, the air cool in his lungs, and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, the past shimmered, the war camp's smoky braziers, the metallic sting of blood on snow, the way his blade had once sung through the dawn like a silver hymn. Now his discipline lived in stillness, in the precise unfurling of his breath, in the way his knuckles whitened around the teacup not from rage, but from the quiet exertion of holding on and letting go. The last sip of tea lingered, bitter yet cleansing, a reminder that mastery was not merely in the strike, but in the patience between. The light shifted, amber to dusk, and with it came the cicadas' evening song, their ceaseless drone a mirror to the hum of his own restless spirit. He had stood at the crossroads of eras, his sword a relic, his honor a compass. Tonight, as he lay upon the thin futon, the rustle of silk against his weathered skin, he listened to the distant temple bell toll once, twice a slow heartbeat of the universe. The war drum of his youth had faded into this, a single resonant note stretching into the dark. His body ached, but his mind was clear. The way had carried him here to this stillness, this dignity, the heir to his dojo, a bright-eyed boy who still stumbled over his footwork, had bowed deeply that morning, his grip firm on the bokken, his future unfolding like a scroll. The old warrior smiled into the shadows. Let the young carve their legends. His was written in the calligraphy of ink and resolve, in the unbroken line between his breath and the wind through the pines. The gods would remember, and so, wrapped in the faint perfume of cedar and memory, he surrendered to sleep, the weight of his years dissolving like mist over still water, unburdened, at last, and at peace.